This conference will now be recorded.
With that, I've welcomed everyone. We're going to, first item on the agenda is approval of the June 8th agenda. So I make a motion we approve the agenda for today. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. I see no discussion. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Very good. Motion passes. Also, you have in your packet the May 11th meeting minutes. I move that we approve the May 11th meeting minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I see no discussion. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Item 2C, the TPB chairman's report. I'm going to make most of my comments down under item 5A, so I'm going to move it over to the director at this point in time. So I'll turn it over to Chad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Transportation Policy Body, good afternoon, everyone. Couple of items for you. As a secretary, my report today is on 3 items. The first one is on TIP 2021-2024, an overview. We have Gary Jansen from City of Wichita and also Nick Flanders from WAMPO staff. Both of them have worked with the staff on how do we clarify what TIP projects are for the board members. So with your permission, Mr. Chair, let me request Gary to present the suballocated projects list. Thank you.
Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Chad. Can we pull this spreadsheet up? Did I already screw it up? Where do I need to go? Right there. I can see that packet. Oh, back one. You know which one it is? Here, why don't you open it up real quick? It should be the one that's included in the packet, right? That's the one. Okay. Thank you, Gary Jansen, City of Wichita. I don't want to bore everybody to death with this. I'll try to be brief, but I said I didn't mind helping explain this. This spreadsheet, hopefully that everybody can see this, is a summary of the 4-year TIP. If anybody were to look through the WAMPO document now, and this isn't a bad thing by any means, but it's kind of hard to tell through each year. You can see the projects that are in there, but it's really hard to tell exactly how they go together. And at any point in time, you wouldn't know exactly what funds are available. So I had suggested to Chad here some time back, we got to thinking of some years ago, there's quite a few members on the TAC committee and maybe even some from the policy body that'll recognize this. A simple Excel spreadsheet that has all 4 years on it, and it's broken down in a way that it's really easy to see which projects are in which year, what the allocation is, and how much funding is available. And so I might walk through the first year here without going into a ton of gory detail. This is something we recommended, not just from the city, but in talking to Jim Weber with the county and Dan Squires and others, that this would be a very good tool to re-implement going forward. Everybody has access to it. And we even recommended that this be something that could be reviewed on a fairly regular basis. The last time I talked to Dan Squires about this from Derby, he reminded me that we used to, during TAC meetings, we would make some changes on the fly using this spreadsheet because it was so easy to shuffle projects around and you could see the economic impact. Every once in a while, someone runs into a hardship, and if the community isn't going to make it within the year that they're in, we all want to help. And so this showed options of what we'd be able to do. So again, I could probably talk about this for a lot longer than anybody wants me to. So let me go through some basics of this. What I would tell you, especially at the top of this first year, we're not going to get caught up in a lot of those numbers. I want to start over here at the left. And a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory, but the left column is the project sponsor. You can see in 2021, there's numerous communities that have projects, some that have multiple projects. The middle column is the project itself. One thing I want to mention real quick, so that nobody gets too confused, parenthetically, on that project description, you'll see multiple years. Typically, that includes also the local funding year. So what I would tell you is, if I was anybody, I wouldn't get too caught up on that. If there's multiple federal years, you'll see right here where it says Wichita Transit Split 1, you'll know that there's a second year to that. If that's at Split 2, then you'll know that 2020 was the first split. Some projects are split into multiple years. I'll talk about that more in just a minute. It's not necessarily germane to this worksheet itself, but it is important to the overall process. So we've got the projects in here. These have all gone through the process. For every 2 years, we do a new tip. The next one will be in 2023. So this tip is 2021, 22, 23, and 24. Next time we do a tip, it'll be 23 and 24, and it'll add on 25 and 26. Until then, this is going to be really valuable for all of us to use. 3 types of funding that come through WAMPO. This is not my area of expertise. I'm not going to try to pretend that it is. But surface transportation funds, congestion mitigation and air quality funds, and transportation alternative funds. Basically, what we have been told, and again, WAMPO and KDOT especially can explain this better than me. It used to be at one time, transportation alternative funds were called transportation enhancement funds, and this really isn't that critical, but people with some history will understand this. And those were designated primarily towards alternative transportation, bike, PED, multimodal. Congestion mitigation and air quality funding can be used for just about anything we want, just like the TA can now too. I will remind everybody that if the area, any place within the region, certainly Wichita being the biggest part of it, ever goes into non-attainment for air quality, we will be mandated to use these CMAQ funds specifically to that first and foremost to try to get us out of and get us back into attainment. In my time doing this, which never happened, but that is a specific tie to these funds that we might at some point, if we ever got there, and I don't think we will, we'd have to use that. Surface transportation is the most general category and where the most funds are. Effectively, all of those funds collectively can be used for whatever the WAMPO decides to use them for through the project selection process, through ultimate approval by the TAC and by the transportation policy body. Following down each of these columns, you can see in this total programmed in 2021 was 14.8 million in STP, 1.8 million in CMAQ, 1.35 million in TA for a total of $18 million. That's not a normal year. A normal year has historically been $11 to $12 million. So we look at this tip overall being $44 to $48 million. This is important to all of us. It's not the only reason WAMPO exists, but it's something that we all pay attention to and why I think this spreadsheet is so important. Just tell you real quickly why that number is bigger than what you'll see on the next years is there was a carryover, this very up right-hand corner. There was a project in 2021 that needed to move. KDOT was gracious enough to allow that funding that wasn't used to carry over. So there was a $5.7 million head start on 2020. That's why that's almost $18 million. Typically, as you go down into 2022, each year is about 11.3 million. One of the things I might mention then, if you look at the bottom right, that's the fund balance currently for 2021. We're coming up towards the end of fiscal year 2021 on September 30th. Between now and then, there are other projects that could bid. There's other things that could deobligate. This number might change. It might become more. KDOT allows $1 million each year to carry over then to the next year. just as using this as a resource, why this is so good to see these numbers, and based on the policy that the policy body and the TAC recently adopted for how you deal with leftover funds, additional program funds, is if this number grew or if it stayed at 63,000, the policy body would have the option to ask project sponsors if anybody still had a project to bid that was unobligated in 2021, if they might be able to use the $63,000. That's one option. And hey, that's a good thing. That's actually was listed as our top priority in where this funding goes. If there's a split project that could be moved up and use a portion of that, that's another option. The other option is KDOT allows up to $1 million to move to 2022. My guess is if it stayed like this by September 30th, all would probably decide to move that 63,000. This number down here then grows by 63,000. So I'm not going to go through every single year, but you can see the split too with the Wichita Transit. Here's what's important about those splits. A couple things. Number one, they provide flexibility for moving money up from a year below and utilizing, because one thing that we need to keep in mind, before KDOT allowed carrying over $1 million, if we had leftover funds on September 30th, they were gone, and they were gone to the region and we didn't get them back. That's still true of anything over $1 million. So that's something everybody needs to be cognizant of. And this spreadsheet does a great job of keeping us on track and knowing that maybe we've got to find a place to spend money or we're going to lose it. We've done some mad scrambles over the years. KDOT's worked tremendously well with it, but they've got rules they've got to work within also. But we always try to find ways to keep that money in the region. I think that's a goal all of us probably want to do, is to keep it in the region. So if you look at year two right now, 2022, it shows us having a balance of just under $1.1 million. You know, we haven't even got into fiscal year 2022 yet. So who knows what that number looks like when we're done. The way things have trended previously, it's possible that that number grows, but I will tell you, we've all started to see some increases in construction prices, even outside the whole lumber issue. We're starting to hear that there's issues with pipe and everything else. So we might start seeing prices go up some more. And per that approved policy I talked about for remaining funds, I would expect if these project sponsors are asked to update their prices, that this $1 million probably disappears pretty quick, and that's okay. I would contend myself, in the truest sense of how this TIP is supposed to work, again, that all this money stays in this region. All of the members of WAMPO should have the first shot at it, so I think it works great that way. But I would come back to the whole reason for this discussion today is this spreadsheet, that this is such a great depiction and quick visual of where we are currently at. Again, I've recommended that we try to keep this up to date as often as possible. I know Nick does a great job working with KDOT, and these numbers bounce around a lot, so it's not like we can do it every week. But I think this is important for the TAC and the policy body to see this. As you look on down through here for 2023, you'll start to see some other split projects. I mentioned these numbers in parentheses. What KDOT has done to really help us out over the years, I can tell you from the perspective of Wichita, we've had projects that have been split into 3 or 4 years. One of the things I started to mention, I didn't want to lose track of, was anybody in 2022 that has a project in here has to obligate by the end of that fiscal year, which means they have to have their plans done, approved by KDOT, and ready to bid the project. They have to have the local funding in place or risk losing that funding. So this takes a while. People have to be able to plan ahead. Once they're in this TIP, once they're in this spreadsheet, if you will, we need to work together to make sure that they can keep that commitment and keep that going. So if there's other federal money to help them out, that makes sense. So just to clarify real quick, if you look at a split project here with Wichita Transit, this project has to be bid, has to be obligated in this first fiscal year. What happens is Wichita has to cover the cost of the entire project up front and won't get reimbursed for $924,000 of it until into that next fiscal year. That doesn't work too bad for the larger communities. generally have the capacity to do it, but for the smaller communities, it's been a challenge. However, it allows this tip to work better because you're not overloading. Some of these projects are big enough, you could end up with only 1 or 2 people getting funding in 1 year. If you try to always keep it in the same year. This West Street project that the city of Wichita has that shows multiple years, excuse me, it could probably take the better part of 1 year of the tip, and that's really not fair, and it's not what we want to do, and I don't think that's what anybody wants to do. So we try to find a way to split that up. You can see 2023 right now shows a balance of $1.1 million. 2024, as it happens to sit, currently shows a deficit of $814,000. So we'll see how this goes. I've seen, because I've been involved in this a long time, again, as projects are closing out, these might be projects that bid in 2017 that take several years to build and take a while to close out. As they finally go on the books and the numbers come in, there may be some additional de-obligated funds that come back into the tip. As projects are bid and you get favorable bid prices, there could be additional money that comes back in. So these numbers will fluctuate, but I think it's critical that we all see what these look like on a fairly regular basis. So I think with that, I'm probably going to shut up, and hopefully I didn't bore everybody to death.
Well, thank you, Gary. Does anyone have any questions for Gary? Well, we reviewed this recently. We had Jim Weber, Gary, Councilwoman Tuttle, myself, and Chad in a meeting recently and took a look at this. And we think this is a valuable tool that we can use so that it is very easy to understand exactly what we're spending, where we're getting the money, and where it's going each year. One of the things that we need to make sure that we do, though, to make it a valuable tool is it needs to be correct and current. And we all know that a lot of changes are going into what it costs in order to build a new project today. Costs are going up daily. So Chad's going to be sending out a call for updates to this so that we can see exactly where we're at currently. And we'll keep this informed for everyone and keep it up to date so that you can see exactly where we're at. We've really got 2 goals that we've been working on recently. Is first, we needed to get a handle on what it costs to operate WAMPO, and we now have a pretty good way of looking at the finances for the operation of WAMPO. But then the second portion of it is what it costs to actually do the projects, and that's what this is about. Is for us to have a good visibility of exactly what it takes to operate the projects that we've got coming up. So that's why we think this is a good idea. If anyone has any questions or anything, I'll open it up and see if anybody has anything for Gary or for Chad or myself. Do we have any questions? Seeing none, Gary, you either dazzle them or put them to sleep. I'm not sure which.
I think it's the latter, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, Chad, next item.
Thank you, Chair. I think following up on Gary's valuable presentation, TIP projects are always complex, and Gary, Nick, and myself put our heads together and find ways how can we make this simple and clarify to board members. That resulted into this spreadsheet. And Nick also has a spreadsheet that is a little beyond the suballocated funds that we just looked at. The suballocated funds just we looked at has a yearly 10 to 12 million per year projects approximately. Whereas, the projects in WAMPO area outside this funding, that is federal and state funding, the sponsor being KDOT, those are projects that are also to be considered because they're investments in the region. Therefore, Nick put together, what is the list beyond this that still, promotes economic development and transportation projects within our region. So Nick has a spreadsheet and Nick will talk about that. And just to give you an idea, those projects will cost approximately 30 to 50 million per year, just so you know how much investments are occurring in our region. Thank you, Nick.
The spreadsheet being shown right now is based off of the one that you just saw, except that in addition to showing the WAMPO suballocated funds of SEP, CMAC, and TA, it shows all state and federal funding sources. The only thing it does not show is local funds, i.e. city or county or WAMPO or transit agency. So if it comes from KDOT or the federal government, it is on here. The first column is all of the state funds. And then most of the, and of course, then there are the funds that primarily go through KDOT for KDOT projects, and then the FTA funds, and finally a category that we labeled earmark, but it refers to member designated project. And let's see here. As looking down here at 23 and 24, you see that the total in the bottom right corner is substantially less than in 22 and 21, but that's to be expected since those are the out years of the TIP cycle. No doubt there will be more in those once we get to the next TIP cycle in a couple years. And I still use the split terminology that was referenced before. However, it is not applied only to the federal. It's also applied here to projects that have state funding, for example, in the preliminary engineering or right-of-way acquisition, and then federal in a later year, for example. And then there are also cases here of projects that are in all 4 years because they're bucket projects. And that's about all on that was not covered in the previous presentation.
Thank you, Nick. And Mr. Chair, the next item I would like to update is on status of 2021 audit. The audit selection committee had recommended a audit consulting firm, and we had now at the moment KDOT is reviewing the selection that is made by the audit, and then once we hear from KDOT about notice to proceed, we will reveal to the awardee that, and then the contract is currently reviewed by the KDOT also. So finalizing contract would be the next step after KDOT reviews and let us know. So that's the status right now. I just want to provide where we are on that. And it should be by next meeting, we should have more concrete status on that. That is for year 2021. That begins very early on January 2022. Once the contract is awarded somewhere in the next few months. So, thank you. The next item is an overview. Before I go to overview, let me request, with your permission, Mr. Chair, Andrew Vance is here. There was a recent transportation coalition meeting with Chamber of Commerce. So I would like to request Andrew to give an update on the transportation coalition meeting.
Welcome, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chad. Andrew Weens, Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. And I'll start off. Chad, you just want me to cover the recent coalition meeting for now? Okay, great. So some of you are on that South Central Kansas Transportation Coalition and hopefully attended the meeting at the end of April. We did have KDOT Secretary Julie Lorenz come to that meeting, which we appreciated, and we're glad to have her in town for that. So she covered a number of topics. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but she gave us kind of an IKE program update, the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, which the legislature passed into law last year. and talked about the funding for that plan over the next few years, and obviously dependent upon funds appropriated by the legislature and signed into law by the governor. She talked about some of the programs that are underway in 2020, whether that's some of the new programs, Preservation Plus, Broadband, Innovation Tech, or some of the programs that we've become familiar with over the years, modernization, preservation, expansion. Cost share has been a priority of KDOT's the last few years, or the last couple of years, and I know the region has received some of those cost share dollars, and certainly think that's a great program that we can continue to leverage state dollars with local funding that some of you help provide. She gave a brief legislative update, which I'll kind of pass along my own twist on that a little bit later in today's meeting. Talked about passenger rail, and I believe there's an Amtrak forum roundtable at 4 o'clock this afternoon that I believe the county's involved with, and Senator Moran, KDOT's involved with that. So look forward to hearing more about that and some of the efforts on the Heartland Flyer passenger rail extension. And then she did give an update also about federal infrastructure talks in Congress and President Biden's proposal, and those debates and conversations are still going on at the federal level. But one of the things that I will highlight, because I think it's something that will become a conversation point maybe for this group, for other groups involved in transportation in the coming years, it sounds like KDOT is going to be involved with a pilot project of sorts on something she called a RUC, which was a new term for me. Many of you have probably heard it if you're in the industry. Maybe it's road usage charge is what that stands for. You may have heard it, and I've heard it called the VMT, vehicle miles traveled, essentially trying to figure out how to fund highway infrastructure in the country, particularly as we're moving towards more electric and hybrid vehicles, and the gas tax revenues continue to decline. Obviously, some of that depends upon the rates, and the federal gas tax hasn't been raised in quite some time. But as cars become more fuel efficient or don't use gasoline at all, certainly we're going to have issues funding our highways. So KDOT's going to be looking at that in the future. We're certainly taking an interest from a Transportation Coalition and Wichita Chamber perspective and how those conversations go. But clearly transportation funding is changing, and we need to be involved in those conversations going forward. So I think I'll probably leave it there, Chad, unless you have questions about the Secretary's update. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Mr. Chair, that's all on the Secretary's report.
Very good. Chad, you also have some new employees. Do you want to introduce each of those?
Yeah, do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like Gary and Nick has presented the TIP projects, in the future, we have a vision to make this more clarity and additional clarity for the members. So we have new staff who will be working on GIS mapping, so that these are illustrated in mapping where the locations are. So there's still work in progress to make it, to provide the clarity on these TIP projects. What does this mean? So we have Jordan Silvers, you can please come to the podium, and then Catherine Chambers, who graduated from Wichita State University, Jordan from Iowa State University. Should they speak, or is that okay? Mr. Chair, thank you, Jordan. Mr. Chair, just an overview for today's meeting. We have one action item on TIP amendments. The one we just, Gary and Nick talked about, 2021, 2024. Every quarter we have a few adjustments and amendments to the TIP project. So Nick will be presenting that, and then there'll be a vote taken after this for action item. Technical Advisory Committee already approved a recommendation for the body. And then we have a City of Andover's update, and then a legislative update from Andrew Weins. So that is the agenda for today for the next few meetings. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Chad. We'll go through, first of all, item 3 on our agenda before we get to the new business. So I can't see very well if we have anybody online that would like to speak in the public comments, but if you do, please speak up so that we can hear you. I'll open it up to public comments at this time. I do not hear anyone who wants to speak on public comments, so we move on to new business. So I'll turn it back over to Chad. You just gave us a preview. We're going to talk about TIP Amendment 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, please go ahead with amendments.
Today we have a regularly scheduled TIP Amendment number 3 for your consideration. It consists of 15 projects, 7 that require formal action and the other 8 being administrative adjustments. You can find details on this at wampo.org/transportation-improvement-program. And here you can see the projects in question. Now to go through the 7 that require formal action. The first is a change to the Academy Avenue project in Mays, in the city of Mays. This amendment does not include any changes to the cost or the funding. However, it does involve a change to the scope, indicating specific side streets that will be incorporated and other details of what will be done, but again, no change to the actual cost. The second amendment is a change to the West Street Harry DePawnee project in the city of Wichita, with the cost estimate having increased by $7,783,990, which for the moment is programmed as all coming from the local sources. No federal money has yet been put towards it. And also a change to the scope reflecting an approved design concept involving the intersection of West Pawnee and Southwest Boulevard. There's also a modification to the North Junction Accelerated project through KDOT. This one consists of shifting some funds from local to KDOT distributed surface transportation block grant. The overall project cost does not change, but it does involve moving $77,550 to surface transportation block grant, and that for that reason it is included here. And now the next 3 projects are all new projects being added in here. Adding a project for right-of-way acquisition for the Northwest bypass in the amount of $10,100,000. This is a KDOT project. Again, it is only the right-of-way acquisition, not the overall project. Next is a project from Starkey, which provides paratransit service in the area, and they put in a project using FTA 5339 funds for a vehicle maintenance facility connected to their headquarters in Wichita. The last new project is for the West Kellogg US 54 400 expansion in West Wichita. This is all, of course. Now the overall project will ultimately be far more, but for now, we have only programmed $2,250,000 in cost for finishing the preliminary engineering and design work on the project. And the last amendment requiring action is removing the regional asset inventory project through WAMPO as the sponsor agency, which had been programmed for $225,000 in the year 2021, but WAMPO decided not to pursue that this fiscal year. The public comment and review period has concluded without receiving any comments. All the projects have been confirmed consistent with the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It's fiscally constrained and has a total cost of $19 million. But again, that includes both local, state, and federal money. So now the Transportation Policy Body has three actions to choose from: approve the amendment as proposed, reject it entirely, or approve it with specific changes. And the recommendation of WAMPO is to approve the amendment as proposed.
Thank you, Nicholas. We appreciate it. Do I have any questions from anyone? I don't hear any questions at this time. I move that we approve the amendment as proposed.
Second, Troy.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please state by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. All right, Nicholas, are you going to cover any more of the tip with the ones that we don't have to vote on?
No.
Nope. Okay, good. Well, item B is an update from Andover. This is one thing that I look forward to each month because we get to see what great things are happening throughout our region. So I'm going to turn it over to Andover to give the briefing, and Les Magnus from the city of Andover should be online.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity to share some things about Andover's growth and development over the past few years. I think Nick's going to allow me here to share my screen. I should be there now. Thanks
And we
again.
can see.
We're all connected. A few years ago, we did a comprehensive plan for the city of Andover, and the goal of that plan was for Andover to be the best place to live, work, learn, and play. You can see from these tiles on this screen to the left there, kind of the typical residential subdivision in Andover, a lot of open spaces and large houses, places to work like the Kansas Medical Center, great schools. The YMCA has a great branch in Andover. We have great parks, 13th Street Sports Park, where we hold all of our baseball and softball games. And down in the lower right corner there is the Capitol Federal Amphitheater that we opened a few years ago. We've hosted many concerts, and most recently the Wichita Music Theater is using the amphitheater this summer. Andover came from very humble beginnings. Like a lot of towns in Kansas, it started on the railroad. It was halfway between Augusta and Wichita, so it was a place for the steam engine to take on water and pick up passengers. This map is from 1888, so it gives you an idea of that spot on the map. Soon became a city in 1882. The first 160 acres was platted by a surveyor who worked for the railroad. Many years went by. 1957, the city was incorporated with a population of 166. Today, our population estimate, 13,278 was the latest I could find in 2018, but you can see that the rapid growth of the population from its beginning in 1957 to current. Currently, the city has grown from 160 acres to about 10.6 square miles. We're bordered on the west by Sedgwick County, and most of that western border is shared with the city of Wichita. Great places to live. You can see there are many alternatives here for housing. The upper left is the typical suburban home with a 3-car garage. Sunstone Apartments in the upper center was opened a few years ago and boasts occupancy rates in the high 90s. I'll point out on the upper right is a new housing product in the Heritage subdivision. It is a high density single family residential with lots in the 3,500 square foot range. Below is the sprawling suburban Flint Hills National residence. And in the bottom right is another new product in that Heritage subdivision, patio homes. The great places to work. We have several banks, some retail, a big Dillon's Marketplace store that is a big driver for our local 1% retailer sales tax that supports street improvement projects. And we've also got a very nice medical core up on 21st Street with the Kansas Medical Center and several new doctor's offices. Learning, education is very important in Andover. We have 2 high schools, 2 middle schools, and 6 elementary schools. Those schools serve not only Andover residents, but the last I knew, 53% of that student population came from Sedgwick County. Our park systems, we've got a great variety of things to do in recreation and leisure. Out here at Central Park, where City Hall is located, we have a lake that has handicapped accessible fishing docks that were built with a partnership with the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks many years ago. We have a lodge building in the upper center photo there that's available for rentals and meetings. Those are all located in the Andover Central Park. I mentioned earlier the Andover 13th Street Sports Park is where many of the organized sports games are played. We have a public golf course and 2 private golf courses, Flint Hills National and Teradyne. So we think we've covered all the bases there on the great quality of life attributes. So to move into transportation, the city of Andover lies on the US 54-400 corridor, just east of the K96 interchange. It's the most significant east-west corridor in southwest or south central Kansas. We have about 24,000 vehicles a day passing through Andover on Highway 54, and about 2,000 of those trips are truck freight trips. We did a corridor study back in 2012, and one of the projections from that corridor study was that there would be 85,000 vehicles per day in 2040. That's a huge growth. That's over 3 times the current vehicles per day. There are about 8,000 workers that commute back and forth between Andover and Wichita each day, and about 4,000 students. Those students are not only USD 385 students, but Butler Community College. There's a great influx of students from Wichita into Butler also. This graph is a graph I pulled out of a WAMPO study for public transit. It gives you an idea of those commuter trips. That 4,756 workers leave Andover to go to the Wichita area for work, and 3,167 come from Wichita into the city of Andover. and there are about 500 that circulate within Andover. This slide's a little hard to look at, but the US 54 corridor, of course, is the most significant transportation route in Andover. The left side of this is 159th Street. That's the Butler-Sedgwick County line. The right side is Prairie Creek Road. And this graphic came from that 2012 US 54-400 corridor study. We've used this document for right-of-way acquisitions for the potential freeway that we've been working very hard to get built in the Ike transportation plan. One of the things that's unique about this corridor alignment and profile is you can see that it has a lot of undulation to it. It's not just an all elevated or below the surface project. It undulates between above 159th Street because of floodplain issues to below Andover Road, back up and matches the existing grade just east of Andover Road, and then over at Prairie Creek Road, again, there is a creek and a floodplain, so it would be an elevated freeway. This is probably the most important transportation project in Andover at this current time. This is a concept that Wichita looked at a few years ago with K96 and Kansas Turnpike on the left over to 143rd Street on the right. We wholeheartedly support this project, and Andrew from South Central Transportation Coalition has been very helpful in putting that project as a high priority out to the region. That 54 corridor has been the scene of a lot of development over the last 20 years. The Dillon store was one of the first to build on the highway corridor in the late 1990s. They outgrew that store so quickly they moved across the street, still on the highway corridor. Applebee's restaurant out there, Emprise Bank, Andover Crossing Apartments, Ameritrust, Firestone. A lot of the brand names you recognize are out on that highway corridor around the intersection of Andover Road. We've got some new projects out there that are something that's very different to the region. This project is called the Heritage Mixed Use. It is just east of Andover Road on the north side of Highway 54. Mixed use in that it has not only residential but commercial, retail, and service businesses mixed together in the same buildings. Currently, the site that's in color is in design. We think that it will be in construction by August of this year. It is very unusual in that it's more of an urban downtown style of building with walkable blocks and a parking garage. These are elevations of that building, something that's pretty unusual for the suburbs. 5 stories, retail office on the ground floor with 4 stories of apartments above and a parking garage. There's also an apartment development just west of Andover Road on the north side of Highway 54. That's 280 units of multifamily. And some elevations of that 3-story apartment product. So there are a lot of things going on up and down that Highway 54 corridor, and all are being built in such a manner that they will play into the ultimate US 54-400 freeway improvements. In preparation for that heritage project, the city did a traffic study. This red corridor is called Yorktown Parkway. It's a collector street that was built to parallel Andover Road to try to give some relief to that 20,000+ trips per day on Andover Road, because around the Highway 54 intersection in the lower right is Prairie Creek Elementary, the YMCA, the Dillon's Marketplace area, and as you progress north up this corridor, you can see in the center is the USD 385 Central School campus that houses a high school, a middle school, and an elementary school with a brand new tennis competition facility and stadium. That corridor progresses on through the Andover Central Park, where City Hall and the library, amphitheater are located, and finally ends up at 13th Street at the Butler Community College and the Andover 13th Street Sports Park. This is a view of that Yorktown Parkway just as it was opened last year. 4 lanes with a divided landscaped median, 10-foot bicycle pedestrian path on one side, 5-foot pedestrian path on the other side. In the tip for construction next year in 2022, we have improvements to 159th Street. That's the Butler-Sedgwick County line between Highway 54 and Central Avenue. This is depicts that 3-lane section that again will have the 5-foot sidewalk on one side and a 10-foot bike ped path on the other. That project came on the heels of the completion of a 159th Street project that built a 3-lane street from Central Avenue up to the Kansas Turnpike and built a new bridge over the Kansas Turnpike that's capable of a 4-lane road section with a 10-foot bike ped path adjacent. Those improvements were just opened up earlier this year. Bicycle pedestrian is a very important component in Andover. We always say that's one of our best investments in recreation and leisure. We have a lot of folks who use our bike paths, not only from Andover proper, but from the region in general. This REDBUD Trail project starts in the heart of downtown Wichita, and we've improved it to a 10-foot concrete paved path through Andover here. You see highlighted in yellow, runs from the 159th Street County line over into our 13th Street Sports Park. This is just a shot of a bridge over the creek in our park, 10-foot bike ped. It's a tremendous amount of use. We followed that concrete improvement path project with a gravel improvement project in cooperation with a group called ARTI, Andover Augusta Rail Trail Initiative, to make improvements to the gravel surface all the way out to Highway 54, which together with the concrete is about 6 miles of improved trails within Butler County. There are currently some talks with the city of Augusta and Butler County about continuing that REDBUD Trail from Highway 54 over to the city of Augusta, and the Kansas Department of Transportation will be involved in a bridge over Highway 54 that was removed some years ago. Again, bike ped and pedestrian connectivity is very important to the city of Andover. You can see these are our major paths and trail projects. Along with that, we have 5-foot and 8-foot sidewalks within neighborhoods that connect out to make these loops and connections within the city and to the REDBUD Trail and sidewalks in the city of Wichita. I'm open for any comments or questions or suggestions you may have. I know several of you are trail riders. I hear from you that you're out on the Redbud Trail. You passed by my personal property. I wave and love to see the use of that trail.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mangus. Do we have any questions at all? I don't hear any questions at this time. Thank you again for the presentation. One of the reasons I like these presentations each month is each and every one of us represent our own communities, our own regions, our own counties. But when you sit down and you're representing yourselves at WAMPO, you have to start thinking regionally. And that's what WAMPO does, is we look regionally. So if we don't know what's going on in the region, it's hard to represent the entire region when we're making decisions on different projects. So briefings like this today and the ones we've had the last couple months are vital for us to take a look at the region and see what kind of projects that are needed out there, because our economic development in the future relies on making sure that we can connect between these different areas. So I want to thank each and every one of you, especially Mr. Mangus today, and everyone that's made the presentation in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, next item, we're going back to Andrew.
One second.
Okay, Andrew, you can. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll try to be brief here, and I apologize to those of you who are at the K254 Corridor Development Association meeting on Friday, because I gave a similar update there. Wanted to talk about the 2021 legislative session. I believe if you turn to page 63 in your packet, there's a little bit of a write-up if you want to follow along. Starting off the session, Governor Kelly proposed a transportation budget that restored $66.8 million to the highway fund above and beyond fiscal year 21. And that's essentially less of a sweep. There's more money going into transportation than before. Excuse me. And so that was positive, welcome news. Essentially, the legislature agreed with that budget proposal and adopted that for the fiscal year 2022 budget. And according to Governor Kelly, she plans to again reduce the highway fund sweeps by another $67 million for fiscal year 23. We'll obviously wait to see if that gets proposed this next legislative session, but it sounds like that will be the case. And if that is the case, then we'll essentially close the bank of KDOT, quote unquote, and have highway fund dollars going to pay for highway fund projects again, rather than being swept for other priorities. So beyond the kind of normal sweeps that the legislature makes for highway patrol, some education, transportation, a few other things. So that was good news to start off the session and to close the session with the legislature adopting that. There was one major transportation bill that we tracked and that did end up getting adopted. In its final form, it was House Bill 2201, and that made some cleanup changes to the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, IKE, that I referenced earlier, which was, again, the IKE program was passed last year in 2020 before COVID shut down the legislative session. This bill was passed by the Senate unanimously, and then the House by a vote of 95 to 27. Had some technical cleanups regarding the state highway fund debt cap for bonding. Essentially, I think it matched what some of the bond rating agencies already wanted to do, which was to consider gross revenues into the highway fund rather than net revenues, which is helpful for highway projects. It also reduced the minimum $100 million threshold that was set in the original Ike legislation for any project to use an alternative delivery approach or design build. And it reduced that floor, that $100 million threshold, down to 10 million, which allows for additional design build projects if and when it makes sense, as long as they're at least $10 million project, which provides some additional flexibility to KDOT, allows contractors to take advantage of that when it makes sense. So, and then finally, the Ike legislation had a provision in it that required the first phase of letting to be done for all the leftover T-Works projects from the last 10-year transportation program before any Ike projects were built. And I think that made some sense to make sure those projects got done. But the bill this year, House Bill 2201, changed that to say that if there's federal stimulus monies available for transportation, that you don't have to comply with that original T-Works first phase letting requirement. Just in case there's federal requirements that allow us to use those dollars for Ike projects that otherwise we'd have to just pass on because of that language in state law. So I think that was helpful. The South Central Kansas Transportation Coalition supported this legislation, and I think our chairman, Brett Lakowski from Trans Systems, was on earlier at least and testified for us on that. So some positive movements this legislative session. Real briefly, I'll just say too, we had a lot of great economic development bills passed, not directly related to transportation per se, but we had some bills passed related to HPIP transferability and decoupling from KIT and KER. We had STAR bonds reauthorized and expanded, angel investor tax credit program, rural housing, University Engineering Initiative Act. They moved the Division of Tourism back to the Department of Commerce. Some bills on licensing reciprocity, tax decoupling, unemployment insurance, including some workforce development funding and programs. So overall, I think a great session, and some of those things will certainly help businesses that are involved in the transportation industry, even if they're not directly related to transportation. But the Ike cleanup bill passing and really the budget's probably the big thing for most folks looking at the progress in the legislative session for transportation, trying to continue to reduce those sweeps out of the highway fund. So happy to take questions if anyone has any on transportation.
Thank you, Andrew. Any questions? I don't hear any questions right now. There's also some cool things that are happening at the federal government level. There's some earmarks that are coming our way that I think that are going to end up passing. I know Sedgwick County put in for several earmarks, and the word that we got is all three that we put in are probably going to be approved, which is great news for the region again. So not only at the state level, but at the federal level, there's a lot of things going to be happening in the near future, and there's going to be more money coming down. We've got the COVID money that we're going to be talking about here in the future a little bit more once we get an update from everybody that tells us exactly how their projects are doing, so that we can start figuring out what we're going to do with that COVID funding. So there truly is a lot that is happening. I appreciate the update from Andrew. I appreciate the support of the Transportation Coalition that Andrew and Brett work very hard for us. So keep tuned because there's more things that are coming down the pipe.
Well said. Thanks for the opportunity. I apologize, I have to jet out. I'm going to go listen to that Amtrak roundtable, but appreciate the time. Thank you.
And Pete Meitzner is going to drop off here in a moment because he's going to be on the Amtrak. So I want to thank everybody that's working that project also.
I'll keep an eye on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to 5A in the executive committee. Let you know a couple things that are happening. We held our executive committee meeting recently. One of the things that we talked about was whether or not to go all in person or stay all remote or do a hybrid. Today we are practicing our first time at doing a hybrid. Looks like most of you decided to do it remotely today. The advantage for a couple folks that are not in Sedgwick County area, this region, the people who are coming joining us from Topeka and so forth, can still join us remotely because some of those aren't traveling yet. So we'll continue to discuss this at each of our executive committee meetings and make a decision each month on what format we're going to use. But today we only have 4 or 5 of us here in the room, but we've got an awful lot online. So if that works, we'll continue that, but we'll discuss it each month. One of the other things we talked about at our last executive committee meeting was a little bit of a budget update. As I mentioned earlier, the executive committee and the TPB really have to look at 2 aspects of funding for WAMPO. One is what it costs us to operate WAMPO, and what it costs us to do the projects. What we've got is a brand new set of documents that Chad is now preparing for the executive committee each month, so that we can take a look at what it costs to operate WAMPO and make sure that we are spending wisely, and we're spending on things that we need to, and that we don't overspend. Because as you recall, about a year ago, we were going to be going in a deficit, which we can't. We've got a good handle, I think, on how we're funding the operations of WAMPO. And from the spreadsheet you just saw that Gary produced for us, I think we've got a good handle on what we're doing for the expenses for the different projects. So those are 2 things that we've been working pretty hard on. One of the other things that we've talked about for a couple months now is TPB membership. And as you recall, at the last meeting, we briefed a little bit about it. Following that, we did have a meeting with the state and the federal representatives talking about TPB membership. And one of the things we want to make sure that we're doing is comprehensive planning. How do we make sure that we involve all of the different stakeholders in transportation planning? And so a couple of the things we looked at and we talked about, and one thing that you'll see a little bit of a change on the public comment portion as we start the meeting. Sedgwick County started allowing emails to come in before the meeting so that we could review those if someone had some comments. So besides in-person public comments, either by the hybrid method or in person here in the room, we're going to start allowing some email communications that we can then provide to the TPB members to make sure that we're hearing what the public is interested in. In addition, I know most communities have some type of public way that they've got individual committees that take care of special items and then bring recommendations to the voting members. I know that we've got like the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission, we've got aging, we've got folks that work disabilities. So we've got a lot of committees that represent the public, and they make recommendations to the main body, and then we can use those recommendations to make decisions. And so I think that as we're looking at comprehensive planning, one of the main areas that we can take a look at is, as you noticed, that Andrew Weems briefed us today, and he and Brett Letowski run the Transportation Coalition, which is another private group, but a number of us are actually on that group also. And they make recommendations that they go to Topeka, to the federal government, to support projects that are in this area. And we need those voices as we're trying to get projects through. This WAMPO can't do it by themselves. We have to work with all of the different elected bodies. We've got to work with the other agencies that are involved in transportation in the future. So what we decided on was that we need to make sure that each month when Chad briefs us after we've had a Transportation Coalition meeting, that Chad will, during his portion of the meeting, will bring us up to speed on anything that the Transportation Coalition is working that may be something that we need to involve WAMPO in. Also, we're all elected members, so we represent our communities, and most people, if you live in any of the cities, you're probably represented at least twice here by a city council person or a county commissioner of some sort. So the public has an opportunity to be heard at WAMPO, and that's what the executive committee has decided that we're not going to expand the membership in WAMPO because of all of the different things that I discussed. The public does have an opportunity several different ways to make sure that they're heard. So we're going to close this issue, and we did make some adjustments that you're going to see in the future on how that we receive public comments and some of the advisory committee that we can use to brief us. But I just wanted to bring everyone up to speed on what we're doing there. So those were the main things that we talked about at our last executive meeting. So are there any questions from that? Seeing none, we'll go to our other committees. Active Transportation, are Alan or Jack online that would like to speak? Doesn't sound like either one's on, so we'll move on to KDOT. Tom Hine, are you online?
I am online, thank you. We had a recent announcement on cost share programs announced in the spring, and two WAMPO entities were awarded a cost share project. One is the city of Cheney. They will build a 6-foot sidewalk to link their citizens to a recently constructed sports complex. The second one is Sedgwick County for the reconstruction of 95th Street South between 119th and 135th Street. This is to become a 2-lane industrial paved section with some recent economic development in the area. So that's a positive thing. And so those are two cost shares that just were announced recently. We've also had two new KDOT projects come online in the last few weeks. Westbound K96, a couple of bridge deck repairs, one of them at Ridge Road, and because of that, the Ridge Road entrance ramp to westbound K96 will be closed till October, so a little bit of inconvenience there, but those bridge projects are right at that ramp, so that's necessary. A second project, US 54 westbound, there'll be some pavement repairs at Ridge Road there, coincidentally, and also through the city of Goddard. So we'll start this month and last for a few months. And lastly, you may have seen on Gary's spreadsheet the WAMPO regional fiber optics plan that KDOT will administer. We have selected a consultant for that, and work should begin very quickly. And that's all from Wichita KDOT.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Any questions for Tom? Seeing none, we'll work with KDOT again with Mike Moriarty. Yana?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to briefly thank Andrew and the Chamber for the very comprehensive legislative update. Also wanted to announce quickly a personnel change in the KDOT planning group. You may recall a month or two ago I mentioned that KDOT was on the hunt for a new GIS manager. We had a tremendous pool of candidates for this opportunity, and I'm pleased to announce that James Stewart will be joining KDOT as our new manager. He does start next Monday, so we are excited to have him on board and have him spearhead our efforts in the GIS space.
Super, I appreciate it. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll go on to Federal Highway. Mr. Buckland, you on? Hey, do we have anyone else from Federal Highway that would like to speak?
Cicely, are you able to join, Cicely? I know Rick Backlund has said he's unable to join today.
Okay. I don't hear anyone from Federal Highway right now. We'll move on to other business. Anyone have anything for other business today? Hearing nothing, I will adjourn the meeting for June the 8th, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to our next meeting. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.